The East Room of the White House glowed with elegance. Gold-rimmed chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting a warm glow across the expansive hall filled with the most influential figures in America. It was March 20th, 2025, and the White House was buzzing with excitement. Barron Trump, the youngest child of President Donald Trump, was celebrating his 19th birthday. Dressed in a sharp, navy blue suit, Barron stood tall near the grand piano, exchanging smiles and polite conversations with guests who had come to honor his special day. Despite the lavish surroundings, the towering floral arrangements, the polished marble floors, and the five-tiered cake sparkling with edible gold, there was an air of warmth and intimacy. Friends from his private school days, political dignitaries, and a few celebrities mingled, but there was one guest whose presence drew particular attention. Karoline Leavitt, the newly appointed White House press secretary, stood quietly near the fireplace. At 31 years old, she had already made history as the youngest person to hold the position. With her sharp intelligence and unwavering dedication, she had quickly become one of President Trump's most trusted advisors. But tonight, she wasn't here to brief the press or defend policies. She had come to deliver a gift. A gift that would soon leave the entire room speechless. As the evening progressed, laughter echoed through the halls. The president himself was in high spirits, proudly introducing Barron to longtime friends and loyal supporters. First Lady Melania Trump, always the picture of elegance, moved gracefully through the crowd, ensuring every detail of the night was perfect for her son. But beneath Barron's composed exterior, there was a flicker of uncertainty. Being the son of the President of the United States wasn't easy. Every move he made was scrutinized, every word he spoke dissected by the media. At 19, he found himself straddling the line between adulthood and public expectation, craving a sense of normalcy that often felt out of reach. And Karoline Leavitt understood that better than most. As the clock struck 9 p.m., the live band softened their music and the room grew quiet. President Trump, standing behind an ornate podium, tapped the microphone with a familiar confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice commanding yet warm, "tonight, we gather not as politicians or public figures but as family and friends to celebrate an incredible young man, my son, Barron." A wave of applause swept through the crowd. Barron shifted slightly, his face flushing with modesty. "Barron," Trump continued, turning toward his son, "you've grown into a man your mother and I are immensely proud of. Smart, kind-hearted, and strong, there is no limit to what you can achieve." Melania smiled softly, her eyes glistening as she reached for her son's hand. "And now," Trump added with a twinkle in his eye, "there's someone here who has something very special for you." "Karoline?" All eyes turned to Karoline Leavitt. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. In her hands, she held a small mahogany box, simple, yet elegant. Barron raised an eyebrow in curiosity as she approached. "Happy birthday, Barron," she said warmly, extending the box toward him. "I hope this reminds you that who you are matters far more than what the world expects you to be." Intrigued, Barron accepted the gift and carefully lifted the lid. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Inside the box lay a worn, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The initials FDR were faintly embossed on the cover. His brow furrowed in confusion. "Is this?" Karoline nodded, her voice soft but resolute. "It belonged to Franklin D. Roosevelt, one of America's most iconic presidents. But it's not just any journal." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "It holds his personal reflections, his doubts, his hopes, and the unseen battles he fought behind closed doors." A ripple of awe swept through the room. Even President Trump, a man rarely at a loss for words, appeared momentarily taken aback. "You've grown up in the public eye," Karoline continued, "and I know how heavy that weight can be. Roosevelt once wrote, 'The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.' But in this journal, you'll see that even he wasn't immune to fear or loneliness. I hope his words remind you that being human, being yourself, is the greatest strength you have. Silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes when something profound has been spoken." For a moment, Barron simply stared at the journal. Then, with a quiet thank you, he closed the box and pulled Karoline into a hug. It wasn't the brief, polite gesture of political circles. It was genuine, heartfelt. And as the room burst into applause, no one, not even the most seasoned reporters, could deny it. This was a moment America would never forget. As the applause settled and the band resumed a soft, jazzy melody, the atmosphere in the East Room shifted. The grandeur of the White House seemed to fade, replaced by an unmistakable warmth, a reminder that, at its core, this was not just a political event but a celebration of a young man finding his place in the world. Barron Trump stood at the center of it all, still holding the mahogany box close to his chest. His fingers brushed across the leather-bound journal inside, a relic from a man who had once carried the weight of a nation during its darkest hours. For all the luxury surrounding him, this gift felt different. It wasn't just rare, it felt personal. President Trump, standing a few feet away, leaned toward Karoline Leavitt with a raised brow. "I have to admit," he said, his usual bravado softened by genuine curiosity, "that's one hell of a gift. How did you get your hands on it?" Karoline smiled. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "Roosevelt's personal writings aren't exactly available on eBay." Her voice lowered as she added, "I worked with a historian from the National Archives, someone who owed me a favor. When I told him why I wanted it, he agreed that Barron should have it." The president chuckled softly. "You've always known how to get things done." Karoline's smile faded into something more thoughtful. "It wasn't just about the gift," she said quietly. "I know what it's like to live under a microscope where every choice you make feels like it's being judged by the entire world. I wanted Barron to understand that even the greatest leaders have struggled with that." Her words hung in the air for a moment before the president nodded, a rare glint of gratitude in his usually steel-gray eyes. "I appreciate that," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Across the room, Barron slipped away from the crowd, the journal still in hand. He found a quieter corner near the tall windows that overlooked the South Lawn, where the distant lights of Washington, D.C. twinkled like stars. His heart thudded softly as he opened the journal for the first time. The pages were fragile, the ink slightly faded but legible. A passage from March 4, 1933, the day of Roosevelt's first inauguration, caught his eye. "What the public does not see are the nights I cannot sleep. I wonder, am I strong enough to carry this nation forward? But fear is the enemy of hope. I must not let it win." Barron exhaled slowly, the weight of those words settling deep inside him. People thought he had it easy, son of a billionaire, heir to a powerful family. But what they didn't see were the moments when the pressure became too much. When it felt like the world expected him to be someone he wasn't even sure he wanted to be. "Deep thoughts for a birthday, huh?" Barron looked up to find Karoline standing nearby, a knowing smile on her face. She held a glass of sparkling water, her demeanor far more relaxed away from the political spotlight. "I wasn't expecting this," he admitted, gesturing to the journal. "It's incredible. Thank you." Karoline leaned against the window frame, her gaze softening. "You know," she said, "when I was 25 and started working in politics, I thought I had to be perfect. One mistake, and you're done. But the truth is, the people who make a real difference, they're not perfect. They're human." Barron tilted his head. "Is that why you gave me this?" She nodded. "You have more eyes on you than most people ever will. I wanted you to know that it's okay to feel unsure sometimes. Even the people who changed the world had days where they doubted themselves." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the distant hum of conversation filling the background. "I don't really know what I want to do," Barron admitted, his voice quieter now. "People assume I'll go into politics or business, but what if I want something different?" Karoline smiled. "Then you choose different," she said simply. "This life, being part of a famous family, doesn't mean you lose your own voice. It's still yours to find." Her words struck something deep within him. For so long, he had felt like he was living inside a mold that had been cast long before he was born. But maybe, just maybe, he could break free of it. Before he could respond, a booming voice broke through the hush. "There you are." Barron turned to see Donald Trump Jr., his older half-brother, striding toward them with a wide grin. "Dad's about to cut the cake, and he's demanding you stand front and center." With a final glance at the journal, Barron closed the box and tucked it under his arm. "Thanks again, Karoline," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "Anytime," she replied, watching as he disappeared back into the heart of the celebration. As she stood alone by the window, Karoline allowed herself a small, private smile. She knew that her gift wouldn't make life easier for Barron, but if it helped him find his way, it was worth everything. And in the years to come, long after the lights of the White House faded behind him, he would remember this night and the words that taught him to be fearless in the face of the unknown. The rich scent of vanilla and buttercream filled the air as a staff member wheeled out the towering 5-tiered cake. A masterpiece in red, white, and blue with golden accents. At the very top, a delicate sugar sculpture of the White House gleamed under the chandelier lights. Guests gathered around as President Trump clapped his hands together, calling the room's attention. "All right, folks," he said, flashing his signature grin. Time to cut the cake. And let me tell you, it's almost as huge as my election win. The room erupted in laughter, and even Barron cracked a smile as he moved to his father's side. Karoline, watching from the edge of the crowd, observed the scene with a mix of warmth and quiet contemplation. To most people, this was simply another Trump family event, lavish, loud, and larger than life. But beneath the spectacle, she saw something else. A young man standing at a crossroads. As Barron lifted the silver cake knife, his mother, Melania Trump, reached out to steady his hand with a gentle touch. Her face, usually a mask of serene composure, softened with pride. No matter how high the stakes or how bright the spotlight, she would always see him as her son first. With a swift motion, the blade sank through the soft layers of cake. Applause filled the room once again as Barron handed the first slice to his mother, followed by his father. Then, with a playful smirk, he handed the next slice to Donald Trump Jr., who pretended to check it for hidden messages. Yet, as the celebration continued, Barron's thoughts drifted back to the journal tucked safely inside the mahogany box. Every time he met a guest or posed for a photo, Roosevelt's words echoed in his mind. Fear is the enemy of hope. Felt like those words had been written for him. For all the privileges he had, there were also burdens. Expectations so heavy they sometimes felt impossible to bear. And though he was surrounded by people tonight, there were times when he felt completely alone in it all. Later that evening, after most of the guests had trickled out, Barron slipped away from the main hall. The White House at night was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that allowed thoughts to grow louder. He made his way to the Lincoln bedroom, one of the most historic rooms in the residence. The polished wood and antique furnishings seemed to hum with the weight of past presidents who had once walked these same halls. He settled into an armchair near the fireplace, opening the journal again. This time he flipped toward the middle, stopping at a page where Roosevelt had written about the 1940 election, one of the most divisive and stressful times of his presidency. Power does not define a man, how he uses it does. My greatest duty is not to hold office but to serve the people who trust in me, even when I doubt myself. The words struck him hard. Was this the life he wanted? To walk in the footsteps of men who had come before him, living under constant scrutiny, never truly free to be himself? Or could he, as Karoline had said, choose his own path? The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to find Melania standing in the doorway, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the chandelier. She carried a delicate porcelain cup of herbal tea, a ritual she had relied on for years to calm her nerves. I thought I might find you here, she said, her voice gentle as she crossed the room to sit beside him. Barron closed the journal but kept it on his lap. I needed a little quiet, he admitted. Melania nodded in understanding. It can be a lot, she said simply. Her accent, soft and familiar, felt like a reminder of home. When your father became president, I worried about you. You were so young, only 10. I wanted to protect you from all of this. She gestured around the room, indicating not just the White House, but everything it represented. He glanced down at the journal. Do you ever wonder if I'm supposed to follow in his footsteps? His mother tilted her head, studying him carefully. I wonder, she said, but I do not decide. That is for you, Barron. Your life belongs to you. Whatever path you choose, your father and I will support you. Her words settled something inside him, a reassurance he hadn't realized he needed. I don't know what I want yet, he confessed. Melania smiled softly. You are 19, my son. You have time. Do not rush to become something others expect. Find what makes you proud. Barron exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing. Thanks, Mom. She leaned over, pressing a kiss to his forehead, the same way she had when he was a little boy. Always, she whispered. As she rose to leave, Barron returned his attention to the journal. This time, he flipped to the very last entry, penned shortly before Roosevelt's death in 1945. The words, shaky with age but powerful in meaning, read, No man stands alone if he stands with purpose. The world will judge, but your heart knows the truth. For the first time in a long while, Barron felt something like clarity. Maybe he didn't have to figure everything out right now. Maybe it was okay to be uncertain, to question, to wonder, to dream beyond what others expected. And maybe, just maybe, this gift from Karoline Leavitt had given him something far greater than a piece of history. It had given him permission to be himself. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the White House residence, casting warm golden streaks across the plush carpets. Despite the late-night celebrations, Barron Trump woke early. The journal, now a constant presence, rested on his bedside table, its aged leather cover catching the morning light. He stretched and reached for it, flipping through the fragile pages once more. With every entry, Roosevelt's words felt more personal, as if the former president himself was offering a hand across time, guiding him through the weight of expectation. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting a staff member, but instead, Karoline Leavitt stepped inside. Dressed in a smart navy blue suit, she carried 2 paper coffee cups and a small box tied with gold ribbon. "I figured you might need a caffeine boost after last night," she said, offering him one of the cups. Barron accepted it with a grin. "You really know how to make an entrance." Karoline laughed softly as she settled into a nearby chair. For all her sharpness behind the White House press podium, there was an ease to her demeanor now, a reminder that beneath the political exterior was a person who cared. "I wanted to check in on you," she said after a moment. "You seemed pretty thoughtful last night." He nodded, turning the journal over in his hands. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted. The things Roosevelt wrote, he wasn't just a president. He was a man dealing with fear and doubt just like anyone else. Karoline smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "Exactly," she said. "And you know what? No one, no matter how powerful, has it all figured out. I wanted you to have this because I know how much pressure you're under. Sometimes when you're surrounded by voices telling you who you should be, you forget that you get to decide." Her words lingered in the air, settling into a place deep inside him. "Did you always want to work in politics?" he asked, curious now. Karoline chuckled softly. "Not exactly," she confessed. "I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire. My parents were school teachers, simple, honest people who believed that hard work mattered. I never thought I'd end up here. But when I started working in communications, I realized stories shape everything. And I wanted to be part of telling the stories that matter." Barron leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "I don't know if I want to be part of all this," he admitted, gesturing toward the world of politics swirling around him. "But I do want to do something meaningful. I just don't know what yet." Karoline nodded, her expression serious. "And that's okay. You're 19, Barron. You're allowed to explore. But never forget, whatever you choose, you are more than just your last name." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For so long, his identity had been tied to being the son of Donald Trump. But maybe he could be something more. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For the journal and for this." Karoline smiled, her warmth genuine. "Anytime." She reached for the small gold ribbon box she had brought and handed it to him. "One more thing," she said. "A little bonus gift." Curious, Barron untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside lay a simple silver compass, its face engraved with the words, "Forge your own path." "It's a reminder," she explained softly. "No matter where life takes you, you always get to choose the direction." For a long moment, Barron just stared at the compass, something stirring deep inside him. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he realized he didn't need to. Because wherever life led him, he would decide the way forward. Later that day, as the bustle of the White House resumed, Barron stood on the south lawn, the journal and compass tucked safely into his coat pocket. The cool breeze ruffled his hair as he gazed out over the sprawling grounds. His father's voice echoed in his head, "Be strong. Be bold. Be a Trump." But now there was another voice too, the words of a man who had faced the greatest trials of his time and left behind a legacy of courage and humility. "No man stands alone if he stands with purpose." And as the wind carried those words into the open sky, Barron Trump made a quiet promise to himself. He would find his own purpose. And when he did, he would stand with it. As the sun dipped low over Washington, D.C., casting an amber glow across the White House, Barron Trump found himself alone in the Rose Garden. The distant hum of the city buzzed softly in the background, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in the thoughts sparked by Karoline Leavitt's gift. The journal rested heavy in his coat pocket, and the silver compass hung loosely in his palm. Both items, small yet powerful, felt like a bridge between the weight of his family legacy and the possibility of his own path forward. A rustling sound pulled him from his thoughts. Turning, he saw Donald Trump striding toward him. His father's broad frame cut a familiar silhouette against the evening sky, his signature red tie swaying slightly in the breeze. "There you are," the president said, his voice warm but commanding. "I was starting to think you were avoiding the old man." Barron chuckled softly, slipping the compass into his pocket. "Just needed a little air," he replied. Donald nodded, falling into step beside him. For a few moments, neither spoke. The air between them was filled with unspoken words, expectations, pride, and the quiet tug of father and son trying to understand one another. "I heard Karoline gave you a gift," his father finally said, his tone curious but not pressing. Barron hesitated before answering. "Yeah," he said. "It's different, but it means a lot." Donald's expression softened just a touch. "She's sharp, that's why I brought her in. But she's also got a good heart. You could learn a thing or two from her." Barron turned to face his father, the question he had been wrestling with rising to the surface. "Dad, did you always know this was what you wanted? The presidency, the business, everything?" For a brief moment, the elder Trump's face shifted, not the public figure or the political giant, but the man behind it all. He exhaled, folding his arms across his chest. "No," he admitted. "When I was your age, I just wanted to build things, to leave something behind that mattered. Politics wasn't the plan. But life has a funny way of pushing you where you're meant to be." Barron considered his father's words carefully. "What if I don't want to follow that same path?" he asked, his voice steadier than he expected. Donald Trump turned toward his son fully now, his blue eyes scanning Barron's face. For once, he didn't respond with a bold proclamation or a joke. Instead, he said something that caught Barron off guard. "Then don't," he said simply. "You're my son, and I'm proud of that. But you're also your own man, Barron. And whatever you do, whether you follow me into this crazy world or strike out on your own, make sure you do it with everything you've got." Barron felt a tension release in his chest, one he hadn't even realized he was holding. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. Donald clapped a firm hand on his shoulder, his expression gentler than it usually was. "You'll figure it out," he said. "And when you do, I'll be behind you no matter what." They stood in silence for a moment longer before Donald added with a grin, "Just don't become a Democrat, kid." Barron laughed, genuinely laughed, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something like freedom. That evening, long after the last guests had departed and the White House grew quiet again, Barron sat by the window of his room, the city lights twinkling beyond the glass. He pulled the journal onto his lap, running his fingers over the leather cover one last time before carefully placing it on a nearby shelf. It wasn't just a gift anymore. It was a reminder that greatness wasn't about fame, power, or even the Trump name. It was about purpose, finding it, fighting for it, and never letting anyone else define it. In his pocket, the compass lay cool against his palm, its engraving a quiet promise. Forge your own path. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, marking the end of his 19th birthday, Barron Trump knew one thing for certain. His story was just beginning.